At Thanksgiving, my dad gave a speech. I'm proud of the grandchildren who reflect what this family truly stands for. My son stared at his untouched plate. I kissed the top of his head, raised my glass and said this. The room went silent. My dad almost choked on his drink. My sister's smile vanished. The moment my dad tapped his glass, I felt my stomach drop. He only does that when he wants an audience. Thanksgiving at my parents' house is always loud. Brooke's twins were running between the kitchen and dining room. Michael was talking about the stock market to anyone who would listen. My mom kept bringing out dishes like we were feeding 40 people instead of 10. Caleb sat next to me, quiet as always. He had lined up his fork and knife perfectly parallel on the napkin. His plate was full, untouched. He waits for me to take the first bite. He says it feels respectful. My dad stood up and smiled the way he does when he thinks he's about to say something important. I just want to say how proud I am, he began. Proud of the grandchildren who reflect what this family truly stands for. Tradition. Faith. Loyalty to the name. He didn't look at Caleb once. He looked straight at Brooke's twins. Brooke beamed like she'd been handed a trophy. Caleb's eyes dropped to his plate. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. His hair still smelled like the shampoo he insists on using because it reminds him of his dad. I stood up before I could talk myself out of it and raised my glass. I'm thankful for the children who survive this family and still choose to be kind. The room went still. Even the twins stopped moving. My dad coughed on his drink. Brooke's smile slid off her face. My mom set her wine glass down and stared at me like I had just insulted a guest. Natalia, this is Thanksgiving, my father said. Exactly, I replied. Here's what none of them at that table wanted to admit. This didn't start tonight. It started 3 months ago when Caleb came home from staying at my parents' house for the weekend. He had been excited to go. My mom had promised to teach him her pie recipe. He walked into our apartment quieter than usual. He put his backpack down and went straight to his room. I followed him after a few minutes and found him sitting on his bed, holding his last name bracelet. It's a little braided thing his dad made for him before he got sick. Mom, he asked, if I changed my last name to yours, would Grandpa be prouder of me? I thought I misheard him. Why would you think that? He shrugged and said Grandpa said it's confusing when someone doesn't carry the real family name. That it makes things complicated. That some things are meant for real descendants. Real descendants. He is 9. I called my mother that night. She said my dad didn't mean anything by it. She said Caleb was too sensitive. She said I was raising him to be that way. Then she slipped. She said, well, you have to understand, Brooke's kids will be the ones inheriting the house anyway. It's just how it makes sense. I didn't even know we were talking about inheritance. Apparently, my parents had updated their will that summer. Apparently, they had already made decisions about who counted. When I asked to see a copy, my mother laughed and said that's not necessary. So I did something they never expected me to do. I asked Michael. My brother and I aren't close, but he has always been practical. I told him Caleb came home asking about changing his name. I told him what Mom had said about the house. There was a long pause on the phone. Then Michael said, you didn't know? Know what? Dad put money into separate accounts for Brooke's kids last year. College funds. He said he wanted to invest in the grandchildren who carry the name forward. I felt cold all over. Did he open one for Caleb? Michael hesitated. Well, that was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't about oversight. It wasn't about misunderstanding. They had decided my son was temporary. And sitting at that Thanksgiving table listening to my father praise legacy and loyalty, I realized something else. They weren't just excluding Caleb. They were planning around him. And I had just found the paperwork to prove it. I didn't find the paperwork by accident. I went looking for it. After my call with Michael, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Caleb's voice in my head. If I changed my last name, would Grandpa be prouder of me? 9 years old, already negotiating his identity for approval. The next week, my mom asked if I could stop by and help her figure out her new phone. She has owned an iPhone for 6 years and still acts like it's a foreign object. Normally I would have said no. That day I said yes immediately. Their house has always felt like a museum. Everything in the same place since I was 12. Same photos on the walls. Same crystal bowl on the entry table. Brooke's wedding portrait front and center. Mine is smaller, off to the side. Daniel's picture disappeared completely after he passed. My mother said it made her sad. I fixed the phone in under 5 minutes. While she was making coffee, I asked casually if Dad was home. Out with the guys, she said. Good. I told her I needed to use the bathroom upstairs. She didn't question it. My parents keep important documents in a locking file cabinet in their bedroom closet. I know because I grew up watching my dad open it whenever he wanted to make a point about something official. He keeps the key in the same place he has for 20 years. Inside an old cigar box on the top shelf. I didn't feel guilty. I felt focused. The will was in a manila folder labeled 2025 revision. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I saw the section titled Distribution of Assets. The house goes to Brooke. Not split. Not shared. Sole ownership. A vacation property I didn't even know they had is set aside in a trust for her twins. There are designated education funds listed by name. Emma. Olivia. Caleb. There was a paragraph about future grandchildren who carry the family name. Took me a second to understand what that meant. Caleb doesn't have my father's last name. He has Daniel's. So in their eyes, he is an outsider. I stood there in their closet holding that paper and something else caught my attention. A separate document clipped behind the will. A draft letter to their attorney. In it, my father wrote that he wanted to ensure assets remained within the bloodline and that no outside party could claim interest through marriage or adoption. Adoption. My heart started pounding. Caleb is adopted. Daniel and I adopted him when he was 3. It was finalized legally. He is my son in every possible way that matters. My parents were polite about it at the time. They bought gifts. They told their friends how proud they were. But apparently on paper that pride had limits. I took pictures of everything with my phone. Every page. Every signature. When I closed the drawer and put the key back, I heard the garage door opening downstairs. My dad was home. I walked down the stairs holding 2 coffee mugs like I had been waiting. He looked at me for a long moment. You staying for dinner, Natalia? No, I said. Caleb has homework. He nodded slowly like he was evaluating something. 3 days later, I got a call from my mom asking why I had been going through their files. I never told her I did. Which means my father checked. Which means he knows I know. And that is why, when he made that toast at Thanksgiving about grandchildren who reflect what this family stands for, I realized he wasn't just praising Brooke's kids. He was warning me. What he didn't realize is that I wasn't the only one who had access to that closet growing up. And there was one document in that file he probably forgot I would understand. The document he forgot about wasn't part of the will. It was older. Tucked behind the updated paperwork was a copy of something from 1998. A trust agreement signed by my grandfather. My dad's father. I remember my grandfather clearly. He was quiet, observant, and never impressed by my dad's obsession with the family name. He used to tell me that character mattered more than lineage. At the time, I didn't realize how much that irritated my father. The trust was simple. When my grandfather passed, his assets were to be divided equally between his direct descendants and held in subtrusts for each grandchild. Each grandchild. Not grandchildren who carry the name. Not biological only. Each grandchild. There were 3 original subtrusts created when he died. One for me. One for Brooke. One for Michael. What I didn't know until I read further was that the trust included a clause allowing each of us to extend beneficiary rights to our children, biological or legally adopted, at our discretion. Meaning my father doesn't control that portion. I do. The money in that trust isn't massive, but it's significant. Enough for college. Enough for a down payment someday. Enough to matter. And my father is the acting trustee. That's why Caleb never received statements. That's why his name never appeared in any paperwork. My dad had simply never initiated the extension. He was betting I didn't know it existed. The morning after Thanksgiving, I called the attorney listed on the trust. His name is Howard Klein. He sounded older than I expected. I introduced myself and gave him the trust number from the document. There was a pause while he pulled it up. Yes, that trust is still active, he said. Your father is currently serving as trustee. I asked him to read the beneficiary extension clause out loud. He did. Then I asked, is there any legal reason my son Caleb would not qualify? Is he legally adopted? Yes. No. There is no reason he would not qualify. Unless the trustee failed to execute the extension paperwork, he added carefully. I thanked him and scheduled an appointment for the following week. That afternoon my father called. I assume you've been busy, he said. What? Making phone calls. I didn't respond. He said, "Natalia, you're misunderstanding things. Estate planning is complicated." I told him I wasn't confused. I told him I had read everything. He was quiet for a few seconds. "That trust was structured differently," he said. "It's not the same as our will." "I know. And as acting trustee, you have a fiduciary duty to treat beneficiaries according to the terms. That includes processing extension requests." Silence again. Then he said something that made everything clear. "Caleb already has your love. Isn't that enough?" That was the moment I understood this was never about paperwork. It was about control. My father believes love is conditional. He believes belonging is earned through resemblance and obedience. Caleb doesn't resemble him. And I've never been obedient. So at Thanksgiving, when I raised my glass and thanked the children who survived this family, I wasn't improvising. I already had an appointment with his attorney on the calendar. What he doesn't know yet is that I'm not just extending the trust to Caleb. I'm requesting a full accounting of every decision he has made as trustee for the past 10 years. And if the numbers don't add up, Thanksgiving will be the least uncomfortable dinner he has this year. The accounting report arrived 2 weeks later. It was thicker than I expected. Howard did not sugarcoat anything. He sent a formal request to my father's office demanding complete records of all trust distributions, investment decisions, and beneficiary communications over the past decade. My dad called me the same day he received it. "This is unnecessary," he said. "It's required," I replied. "You're turning this into a legal battle." "No, I'm turning it into paperwork." He hung up. 3 days later, I got a call from Michael. "What did you do?" he asked. I asked for transparency. "Dad is furious. He says you're accusing him of mismanaging Grandpa's money." "I didn't accuse him of anything. I asked for records." Michael hesitated. I never got annual statements either." That stopped me. "You didn't?" "No. I just assumed the trust wasn't performing well or something." Brooke hadn't received statements either. She told Michael Dad said it was all being reinvested for long-term growth. When the accounting finally came in, Howard invited me to his office. I went alone. The numbers were clean in some places. Standard investment returns. Dividends reinvested. But then there were discretionary distributions labeled administrative adjustments. Large ones. They coincided almost exactly with 2 events. Brooke's twins enrolling in private school. And the down payment on Brooke's new house. I stared at the dates. Those distributions came from the overall trust pool before it was divided into individual subtrusts. Which means technically it affected all 3 of us. Including me. Including Caleb once the extension is processed. Howard adjusted his glasses and said carefully, "A trustee has some discretion, but distributions must align with the trust's intent and benefit all beneficiaries proportionally." "Did these?" "Not proportionally," he said. The room felt very small. So while my father was telling Caleb that some things were meant for real descendants, he had already been moving money around quietly to favor the grandchildren who fit his definition. It wasn't just emotional exclusion. It was financial. I left the office with copies of everything. That night, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. My mother stood behind my father like she always does when he handles conflict. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said the moment I opened the door. Caleb was in the living room building something with his blocks. He looked up and smiled when he saw them. "Hi, Grandpa." My dad hesitated before responding. "Hi, buddy." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You used the trust to fund Brooke's lifestyle," I said. "It was an investment in the family." "Which family?" He didn't answer. I told him I had copies of every transaction. I told him Michael was now asking questions too. "You're threatening your own father over money," he said. "No. I'm protecting my son from being treated like he doesn't belong." He shook his head. "You've always been difficult, Natalia." That word again. Difficult. It's what he called me when I kept my last name. When Daniel and I adopted Caleb. When I went back to work sooner than my mother approved. Difficult means I don't comply. I told him something then that he clearly did not expect. "I'm filing a petition to have you removed as trustee." His face changed. "You wouldn't." "I already have the paperwork drafted." That wasn't entirely true yet. But it would be by morning. He stared at me like he was trying to decide whether I was bluffing. Behind the door, I could hear Caleb laughing at something on television. That sound made the decision easy. If protecting him means dismantling the image my father built around himself, I will. Because this stopped being about inheritance the moment my son started questioning his worth. And my father still doesn't understand something crucial. Caleb heard every word of that Thanksgiving toast. And last night he asked me something else. He asked if we could stop going to Grandpa's house altogether. When Caleb asked if we could stop going to Grandpa's house, he didn't look angry. He looked relieved. We were sitting on the couch. The TV was on, but neither of us were watching it. He said, "I don't think he likes me very much. And I don't want to make him uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. He thought he was the problem. I told him something I should have said sooner. I said, "You are not responsible for how grown adults feel. And you never have to earn a place in this family. You already have one." He nodded, but I could tell he was still trying to process it. The next morning I filed the petition. Howard warned me it would escalate things. Removing a trustee isn't simple. We would have to demonstrate breach of fiduciary duty or conflict of interest. We had both. Within a week, Brooke called. "What are you doing, Natalia? Dad says you're trying to drag us all into court. I'm asking for fairness. You're making it look like we did something wrong. Did you know he used trust funds for your down payment?" Silence. He told us it was a gift. From where? She didn't answer that either. 2 days later, Michael called and said he wanted to join the petition. I didn't even ask him to. He said he had requested his own documentation and noticed similar discrepancies. Investment fees routed through a firm owned by one of Dad's golf buddies. Administrative costs that didn't match market standards. It wasn't just favoritism. It was control layered with quiet self-dealing. When my father received notice that both of his other children had joined the petition, he drove to my apartment again. This time alone. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He said, "If you withdraw this, I'll add Caleb to the trust immediately." Like it was a bargaining chip. Like my son was a line item he could activate or deactivate. I asked him one question. If Caleb had your last name, would we be having this conversation? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for early January. Right before Christmas, my parents sent gifts. 2 large boxes for Brooke's twins. Bikes. A small envelope for Caleb. A bookstore gift card. No note. Caleb held the envelope for a moment and then set it down on the table. "Mom," he asked, "are we still going to see them on Christmas?" I told him the truth. "Well, we're starting our own traditions this year. On Christmas morning it was just the 2 of us. Pancakes. Music. No speeches about legacy." For the first time in months he seemed light. Then on December 27th I got an email from Howard. Subject line, "Urgent." My father had filed a response to the petition. He wasn't just fighting to stay trustee. He was contesting the validity of Caleb's beneficiary eligibility altogether. Claiming procedural irregularities in the adoption paperwork from 6 years ago. I read that sentence 3 times. He wasn't trying to exclude Caleb quietly anymore. He was trying to erase him legally. And that's when I stopped thinking of this as a family dispute. It became a war. The adoption paperwork was not irregular. It was airtight. Daniel and I went through 2 years of evaluations, home studies, background checks. There was nothing informal about it. Nothing questionable. The court finalized everything when Caleb was 3. My father knew that. Which meant his filing wasn't about winning. It was about intimidation. Howard called me the morning after we received the response. He sounded almost impressed. "This is aggressive," he said. "But it's weak. He's arguing technicalities that won't hold up. Why would he risk it? Because if Caleb is formally recognized as an eligible beneficiary under the trust, your father's prior distributions become even more problematic. It strengthens the claim that he acted in bad faith. So this wasn't just about excluding Caleb. It was about protecting himself." The hearing in January was brief but brutal. My father avoided looking at me. Brooke stared straight ahead. Michael sat beside me. When the judge asked whether Caleb was legally adopted, I handed over the certified decree. Stamped. Signed. Final. The judge barely glanced at my father's argument before dismissing it. "Beneficiary eligibility is clear," she said. "The trustee is obligated to process the extension." Just like that. No dramatic speech. No fireworks. Just a simple acknowledgement that my son exists in the eyes of the law whether my father likes it or not. Outside the courthouse, my father finally looked at me. "You've destroyed this family over money," he said. I shook my head. "Oh, you did that when you decided my son wasn't real enough. 2 months later, he stepped down as trustee. A neutral third party took over. The accounting process is still ongoing. It may take another year to sort out the discrepancies. Caleb's name is now officially listed in the trust. He doesn't know the numbers. He doesn't need to. What he does know is this: we haven't been back to my parents' house since Thanksgiving. And last week, when he had to draw a family tree for school, he didn't hesitate. He wrote my name. He wrote his dad's name. And under grandparents, he left a blank space. Then he looked up at me and said, "We can grow our own branches." That's exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing.